Sorry we're getting a little late start, so thank you for your patience. I'm going to say a few words and then I'm going to hand it over to Dan from the Public Interest Law Center, Jerry with the Philly Federation of Teachers, and then batting cleanup, we'll have the Councilman, and then we can take questions at the end if that's okay. You're all set? Everyone's ready to go? Okay, good. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is David Masur, and I'm the Executive Director for the citizen-based environmental advocacy group, PennEnvironment. PennEnvironment has been involved as one of the founding members of the Philly Healthy Schools Initiative, which was formed this past spring to shine the bright spotlight on the ongoing environmental health threats facing our kids, teachers, principals, school workers, and community members in Philadelphia school buildings. I'm honored to be joined today by Councilman Green, by members of the Philly Federation of Teachers and the Public Interest Law Center, as well as Physicians for Social Responsibility. So thank you for joining us for today's important announcement. On the heels of last week's chronic mold outbreak at JB Elementary School in the city's Germantown neighborhood, we are here today to announce that we have submitted a formal right-to-know request to the Philadelphia School District for a battery of data related to the environmental health, or sometimes lack thereof, in the city's school buildings. Yet as we speak today, the public, parents, and other stakeholders still do not know the full extent of the problems or the current status of the fixes at JB Kelly. This shows exactly why today's action is so important. Unfortunately, the example of JB Kelly is just the tip of the toxic iceberg when it comes to environmental health threats found in school buildings across Philadelphia. As concerned parents, school employees, and as taxpayers, we have a right to know and a right to the data that's easily accessible and at our fingertips when it comes to the health of our children and school workers. And we know that the democratic decision-making process can only work and we can only tackle problems when the public has access to information and facts needed to make thoughtful and smart, constructive decisions. For all of these reasons, we have filed our official right-to-know request to the school district. In our request, we have demanded 13 sets of data, including indoor environmental quality data, school inspection data, asbestos information, lead in water information, door sweep surveys, maintenance work orders, facility condition data, drinking water outlet information, lead paint and plaster data, asthma prevalence data, and energy use data. And we have a copy of the right to know letter here for attendees of the media. Sadly, as we know, the fiasco at JB Kelly Elementary School, and only weeks earlier, the massive mold outbreak at Munoz Marin School with over 20,000 feet of mold, clearly highlight the need for action and the policies that the Philly Healthy Schools Initiative originally called for 6 months ago at our formal kickoff. These policies that we're calling on city officials to implement include, number one, improving the public's right to know and school district transparency. Number two, engaging the public, parents, teachers, and stakeholders. Number three, establishing a public task force for Philadelphia school facilities maintenance, operation, capital, and environmental work. Number four, stabilizing all school buildings by immediately identifying, categorizing, prioritizing, and addressing urgent critical safety hazards. We need to establish an adequate set of building conditions that are the bare minimum standards for a healthy learning environment in our school buildings. We must improve communication and share best practices between schools and within the school district of facilities maintenance, operations, capital, environmental, and environment departments and staff. And lastly, of course, we must increase funding for our education systems. We hope today's actions will help ensure that we avert the next potential environmental health risk at our schools. We owe it to our kids, teachers, principals, maintenance workers, and we owe it to the city's taxpayers. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dan from the Public Interest Law Center to say a few words.
My name is Dan Jorvik-Acklesberg. I'm a staff attorney at the Public Interest Law Center. Every child in this city and in this Commonwealth deserves to go to adequately funded schools that befit their endless potential. And that doesn't just mean that they have enough teachers or that they have enough books. It means that they can breathe clean air, drink clean water, and in general be safe and go to school in healthy environments conducive to learning. The School District of Philadelphia, of course, did not create the massive underfunding of public schools in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They didn't create the irrational method by which we fund public schools generally or by which we fund capital projects specifically. But we all have a responsibility, including the school district, to ensure that kids are going to school in safe environments. So our hope is that with this data, we can get to work collaboratively to make sure that all kids are safe when they go to school. And so I just want to thank PennEnvironment and thank Councilman Green for his leadership, and also to thank the teachers who, as the adults in these buildings, have been the ones, I think, raising flags for a long time about the conditions. I think, as the Inquirer reported, there had been teachers complaining about mold in Kelly specifically for quite a while now. And I think it's important to acknowledge that they are the only ones there looking out for the children. That's it.
Thanks, Dan. Next, we're going to have Jerry Roseman with the Philly Federation of Teachers. Jerry's really the eyes and ears for not only our teachers in the building, but I think for community members as a whole. As you'll hear from Jerry, often he has access to school buildings and information that the public never has access to, and often even City Council doesn't have access to. And so we thought it was important to hear from Jerry today. Jerry Roseman with PFT.
Thank you. I work as the Director of Environmental Science for the PFT. My job takes me into all the schools on an almost daily basis, often jointly with the Office of Environmental Management for the district. Nobody is going to disagree that our kids and staff deserve healthy and safe schools, but they don't have them. They just don't. And we see they don't have them when something like J.B. Kelly comes to everybody's attention. But J.B. Kelly is just the most recent situation that came to everyone's attention, and it did so in part because the school closed, not necessarily because of its condition. 6 weeks prior to that, Marin Munoz had an extensive problem, and it closed. And before that, we had a catastrophic boiler explosion. But in between all of that, there are dozens and literally dozens of other schools that are in conditions that are similar, sometimes not quite as widespread as and extensive. But from the middle of August of this year to today, so over a 2-month period, we have conditions of mold and other serious damage in at least 2.5 dozen schools. Those are documented, and that information exists in the district. One of the problems that we run into is that the information is not properly and comprehensively collected, evaluated, and available to everybody for scrutiny and for analysis, which would push forward the ability to fix what needs to be fixed. An example is Kelly, but Munoz as well, where the conditions were so egregious that nobody in the building could have failed to have seen them and understood them. And in fact, they did not fail to do that. So when we walked in on Wednesday last week, there were 10 rooms with black mold visible and buckets collecting water. You can't fail to see those kind of conditions. And they were long-term. The conditions need to be fully described and available so we can we can take the next step that is required, and that is to fix these schools. It's important to point out that not only is the health of kids and staff impacted, and at a school like Kelly, where we have about 20% of the student population having asthma, that is listed, the children listed as having asthma. We have the situation that we face in a lot of our schools, where the most vulnerable populations are the ones who are most suffering. Other than asthma and other health impacts, these conditions impact education, they impact attendance, they impact cost. So at Kelly, what might have been a practical preventive kind of fix and cost 18 months ago and 2 years ago and 8 years ago is now a catastrophic and enormous remediation cost that shouldn't happen. And in fact, at Kelly, we weren't limited to just the problem of mold. There was an asbestos issue at this school as well, because some of the asbestos materials were impacted by the mold. There's also a ventilation problem and many others. So one other important element to these conditions are that they do tend to cascade and involve many other components that need to be grabbed early and can be grabbed early. So I'm going to stop here by saying that the conditions that I see on a regular basis, I find to be more and more disturbing and offensive, actually, in some of these settings. And I think it's time for there to be a collaborative and cooperative arrangement between policymakers, district, stakeholders, inside and outside of schools, and that includes parents as well. So Kelly, I think parents, and the full story still has not been publicly told, and that needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. We will wrap up with Councilman Green, who's been championing many of the policies that the coalition's been calling for. Councilman.
Thank you, David. My name is Councilman Derek Green, and every year, me and my 16 other colleagues vote on millions of dollars of funding for the school district, and I believe based on that responsibility as an elected official, I have a right to know the condition of our schools. In addition, my mother taught in the school district for almost 30 years, and she and also a lot of teachers like her also have a right to know that they are working in safe buildings. Finally, I am the parent of a public school student, and so myself and other parents all around the city of Philadelphia within the school district have a right to know the condition of the schools where they send their children every day. Now, it was based on this belief why I introduced a resolution and had hearings last year regarding the unfortunate situation at FS Edmonds School, where Chris Trackmus, a member of SEIU 32BJ, lost his life. In addition, shortly after that explosion, we had the Locke School that was also closed. And so that's why I thought it was important for me to introduce a resolution, because we have a right to know what's going on with our school buildings. And so in May, when this coalition came together between the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, PennEnvironment, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Public Interest Law Center, and other advocates, it was important for me to join this initiative, because the people and the citizens of the city of Philadelphia have a right to know based on the information we need to know about the condition of our schools. Shortly after that press conference in May, the coalition met with the school district and were given information, we're supposed to receive information about the condition of our schools. And so now here we are, months later, still not receiving this information. Still not receiving this information. Now we've had the situation at J.B. Kelly where the school was closed for a few days. Prior to that, you had Munoz. Prior to that, you had the Locke School. And then prior to that, you had the situation we had at FS Edmonds where Chris Trackmus lost his life. So from my perspective, it was very important for me to sign on to this right to know request. I know my colleagues, Councilwoman Helen Gim, Councilman Bass, have also signed on to this right to know request, because we all believe it's important to have this information for the public. It's important for us as elected officials to have the information we need when we vote on millions of dollars for the school district. It's important for teachers like my mother to have this information because they work in school buildings every year. It's important for employees like the late Chris Traxmus to have this information because they work in buildings every year. And it's important for many parents like myself to have this information where their children are going to school. So that's why I decided to sign on to this right to know request, and hopefully through this process, we'll get the information that we need to provide greater transparency to the citizens of the City of Philadelphia regarding our school buildings.
Great. I want to thank the councilman and our speakers. Obviously, you've seen why this issue is so important. I'll just wrap up by saying my son Owen is in second grade at Southwark and 9th in Mifflin, and I always joke with the coalition members and elected officials in sort of a dry way that when my son in his school has a social event, Mardi Gras or another event, I'm going to get a note back about that event, and my son needs to bring cupcakes or a snack or dress in a certain color or outfit. If Southwark has a mold problem, asbestos problem, pest problem, I do not and will not get a note. So we have some skewed priorities that need to be addressed here, and we think today's right to know request is the first step to get that information, but certainly this should be accessible to the public whenever they want it in a format they can understand, and we hope this leads to that final product. So thank you for joining us today. We'd love to take any questions at this point. Thank you. Do you want to take it? Yeah, maybe I'll say a few words and hand it to Jerry too. I mean, I think one of the challenges, sadly, is that you don't have that access to information. You as a taxpayer, me as a parent, this information is kept close to the vest by the school district. As you know, the school district is not run by an elected school board. It's run by an unelected SRC, and those are the two entities that have access to this data. And so if they choose not to share it, there aren't many avenues. And I tend to think even the councilman would agree that even elected officials at the highest offices we have municipally or at the state level have a problem getting this data. And that you're right, it's an egregious problem and one we're trying to start to fix today. So Jerry knows more about the facility. Oh, and the councilman. Sorry.
I think you asked the right question. That's why we're here and why we had to file this right to know request, based on the fact that when this coalition met with the school district after our press conference in May, we were told information would be forthcoming and we didn't receive it. So that's why we had to take this more formal step of making a right to know request. I mean, City Council engaged with the school district for a memorandum of understanding a little while ago just to get additional financial data. The question is, why don't we have this information? Why doesn't the public have this information? Because it's important not only for City Council members as well as the mayor, but it's important for our teachers, our employees that work in the school district, and also for parents like myself to make sure that we're sending our children to safe schools. I have not received that information. I know the coalition met shortly after we had the press conference in May, and that meeting, from my understanding, was a productive meeting, and the information was going to be forthcoming. We know there's been some transitions in the school district, but that was May. It's now October, and so we've gone from one season to another, from spring to now mid-fall, and we still don't have the information, and we've had another school that had to close because of an environmental situation, much like Munoz, much like Locke, much like Edmonds.
I just want to add one thing. I think that that right to know really leads to a second idea, which is right to act. And it's that right to act that is part of the reason I think that the district may not make information publicly available. Once this information is fully transparent, and you see what Kelly looks like or Locke looks like, people would react in a much different way. That would be a positive thing, but I think that's one reason. And one thing to know is, as difficult as it is to get information publicly and distribute it of the kind that we're talking about just over the last few months in working with the district, something that I do on a regular basis, asthma data that was being previously made available to the committees that are working both inside the district through their Green Futures program. So it's a committee that's set up to evaluate asthma triggers and to try to prevent and help prevent and better treat asthma. It relies on data about how many kids have asthma in the schools. That data has been restricted further. Instead of more information being made available, the information previously being made available is now being truncated. So I think that as Councilman Green is saying, this is a critical time, and it's just the time to make the information open, accessible, and in forms and formats that everybody can look at and use.
I just say, Kristen, I think that one of the things we see when school districts are underfunded across the state, and I think to a certain extent feel under siege and are still trying to do their best to educate their children, I think there's a little bit of a mentality of defensiveness. And I think what we're all trying to do here is say we need to get this information out in the open so that we can work collaboratively.
But if I had a business and I had black mold on Market Street, how would I come to study that? Right, that would be the normal. I mean, I don't know who to direct this question to, but what I'm getting at here is you have employees, rep members, you have, children in the school district. Like, how come it's almost like we're being polite and being nice.
Yeah, no, there's, I don't think you're going to get a great answer. I think there's a lot of outrage. As a parent, I have it. I always joke with Jerry. I moved to Philly from Minnesota, so our anger and our happiness, if you know any Midwesterners, we're the same, dead, monotone delivery. So there's a lot of outrage, but I think it's part of the frustration is we have a system that doesn't have a democratic, small d democratic solution. And so I think, this is step one to force the school district's hand. I think we need better policies. The city council last year took an important and positive step by requiring the school district to take certain steps to address lead in drinking water in our school buildings. Hopefully, city council will try and use that same lever to ratchet, rein in some of these egregious practices. But yes, there's no, sadly, there's not a good answer. But yes, I think if you would have seen parents at J.B. Kelly, you would have seen the level of outrage that understandably comes with this. So, yes.
I can answer that, but I want to say this thing about mold and L&I. We don't have regulations for a lot of this stuff, and we don't have them for that. L&I couldn't enforce anything if they wanted to in that regard. And actually, the lead in drinking water example is interesting because it's similar. That's why it takes this kind of action, I think. But there are no regulations. Kristen, what happened at the school was after these 10 rooms were found, further investigation was done. What was found were the air handling systems were essentially off throughout the entire building. And they were filthy and corroded. Piping is compromised throughout the building. There's asbestos that is in this building and has been known for a long time that's sprayed onto ceilings, and some of that got oversprayed onto pipe insulation that then was moldy, so it caused an asbestos issue as well. So there was asbestos abatement done. The mold was remediated from the building. The asbestos issues were taken care of from the building. On our recommendation and work with the district, we required all of the ventilation components to be operating, to be clean, to have filters, and that also happened. And I verified that the day before, on Tuesday, before school opened Wednesday. I had been asked to come in on Friday, on Saturday, on Sunday, and Monday for the same verification, but each time additional work was needed. As we ended, these basic activities were done. There is significant ongoing work that is needed, primarily with the ventilation system, to monitor that mold does not return and the conditions that led to it do not return, and to address, to make sure that the asbestos stays intact. And this has been at the school for a long time. So there is a lot of work going forward that is needed.
And just to close, I think the questions about oversight are very important. It's the fall of 2017. We're making requests to L&I about what's their role in enforcement. But as we go into the spring, into the budget season, that's when we have the opportunity to ask those additional questions to L&I. And when Jerry talked about regulations being needed, that's something that council can look at and see what power we have to address that issue, especially from an L&I enforcement perspective, so we don't have another school closed without us having information that we need to provide better information to parents, teachers, school district employees, and the city of Philadelphia. So thank you.